Welcome to the Leadership Gallery webinar. So first of all, thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. We'd like to repay your time today and the time that you've taken out of your calendar to share some insights. So it is really our priority to ensure that by the end of our conversation today, we will be able to share with you a few key points that you will be able to apply within your business. Whether you lead a startup, or whether you lead a FTSE 100 company, or whether you lead a team, these are things that we want to share with you so that we can add value. My name is Alex Adamo. I'm the Commercial Director of the Leadership Gallery. And today I will be joined by my colleagues at the Leadership Gallery, Rob Shorik, our CEO and founder, Anish Gupta, our head of strategy and head of IP, and Phil Fester, our head of business development. So let's see the agenda for today. We're going to be looking at three things. First of all, I'd like to lay out some of the context of the things that we're observing by working with leaders of FTSE 100 and FTSE 350 companies, the things that we are observing in the market. Then secondly, the importance of stress testing your strategy and why that is important for your organization. And then third, we want to spell out very clearly what are the 2 or 3 key things that we want you to take away as a result of attending this webinar, which we really hope that you'll be able to use within your business. Also, we do hope that this is only the beginning of a conversation with you, and we'd really like to invite you to future webinars that we will have. So if we go on to the next slide, we will see that a little bit of context. So we are in a so-called VUCA world at the moment, which is a terminology to express volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This is a term that was coined initially in 1987, towards the end of the Cold War, where it was because of the geopolitical tensions. It was very difficult for businesses to plan and prepare appropriately, and for countries as well. They didn't know what the future would hold, and everything looked rather unpredictable. We are in that kind of situation now. A number of reasons. I've just checked the Financial Times a few minutes ago to ensure that I would be in line with the latest news and the latest things that are happening. And on Brexit specifically, I was hoping for a deal to be reached, but it hasn't. Indeed, Michel Barnier just said that there are some discrepancies within the deal, and it seems that the two countries, the UK and the EU, are still far apart. They're still far from reaching a deal, and they only have a couple of weeks left. So that brings a lot of uncertainty. But even when a deal will be reached, if it gets reached, of course, then it'll still be difficult for companies to plan because we don't know what the details of the deals are. Then there is another concept, which is when we say here 4IR, we mean the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Of course, a combination of the digitalization in which we're in, the combination of the biological element, so how people interact with machines, and how machine learning and deep learning is also affecting manufacturing environments and the way that companies operate and that we exist as human beings. So a lot of elements that we need to consider in order to adapt to future steps. And then, of course, COVID-19. Gladly, it seems that a vaccine has been found over the last few weeks, and the UK has just received approval for that. However, there is still a long way out to get out of the COVID-19 situation. And as you all know, as leaders, a lot of the changes that COVID-19 has brought about might be and probably will be permanent. So we need to consider all of those elements. And funnily enough, what we see when we work with leaders of large enterprises is that more often than not, the first point of call for those leaders is to cut cost when they see uncertainty. And that might be fine to please shareholders on the short term, but this is certainly not a solution that can last on the long term. What we advocate is that leaders should instead focus on future delivery, on finding ways to adapt their systems, their processes, their capabilities, their skills, and their employees' engagement. If we go on to the next slide. So this is a very recent study from McKinsey, and a very valid one. And what McKinsey found, this is from no more than a couple of weeks ago that the study came out, is that across a number of key elements, such as health and safety, mental health, workload increases, household responsibility, job security, and even physical health, they found that employees of organizations are increasingly either somewhat or very uncertain and stressed about those elements. And now, when you add this element of stress, those stress factors for employees, that will clearly bring some key changes to organizations on the way they're run, on the way that decisions should be made. And this is why it's very important that if you're a leader that has devised a strategy for 2021, or perhaps you're devising it now, the key thing, are you taking into account those elements? And this is only one study of a much bigger puzzle and a much bigger problem. Are you taking into account all the change that is happening? Now, the message that I want to share with you here is that as a general principle, you should consider to stress test your strategy. Because if you don't, then your strategy might risk not to reflect the actual changes that are happening within the global microeconomy or within your very organization. If we go on to the next point, you will see this is a study that we use very much when we work with leaders, and that is very valid in normal times. From a study from the Harvard Business Review in 2015, 67% of well-formulated strategy fail due to poor execution. Now, you can only imagine what that number could be now in these times of uncertainty. And it's all good and well when we set a strategy, but the question we need to ask ourselves, are we able to execute it? Are we able to execute it appropriately and efficiently? Because if we aren't, then that means our strategy is not fit for purpose. If we go on to the next point, you will see that we found four main reasons from our own research with leaders over the last few years on why strategies tend to fail. And first of all, we see that a lot of organizations tend not to anticipate competitive responses to their strategy or to change in market factors or to regulatory changes. And now it's very important to understand what I mean there is not to respond or react, is about anticipating, proactively anticipating those changes, those competitive responses. Then the key thing, a big roadblock usually for strategies are the legacy systems and processes where strategy demands major change in direction. Many times those legacy systems, they act as a big blocker, which make the strategy execution fail. And then a key thing as well is within looking at our own organization, our own people, skills and capabilities, culture, reward. Do we have engaged employees? Sometimes those elements are not given enough attention. They're considered by the board or by the leadership team. Sometimes, unfortunately, too many times are nice to have. Whereas we believe this is absolutely essential to drive your strategy forward. And then, perhaps most importantly, those reasons are all important, but one that we find most times is the last one, which is organization structures and the decision-making mechanisms are not aligned, whether for different silos or whether different people within the leadership team are just not aligned as a team. Well, if you're not aligned, then it'll be very difficult for your strategy to succeed. If we go on to the next slide. So it is incredibly important when we see organizations that succeed and excel in managing and executing their strategy, is that when you look at your organization as a leader, you have to look at that as a machine with different cogs within it. You can look at structure, capabilities, reward processes, communication, and systems. Now, how do they fit and how do they work together as a well-oiled machine? If you do a change in processes, then how is that going to be affected within rewards and capabilities? Or if you change some systems, is that going to affect the way you communicate, for example? An example is, let's imagine that you are changing the way in which you sell your products to market. From a product-focused solution, you go into, from a product-focused value proposition, you go into a solution-driven value proposition. A very different way of working, a very different way of interacting with your clients. Now you've changed the way the processes and your value proposition is structured, but have you changed the rewards of the sales team? Are you still incentivizing them on the old incentives that you've given them when they were on a product-focused delivery? Or are you giving them now targets that reward when they are having deeper conversations with customers to understand the way in which your customer operates so that you can sell them and you can partner with them on solution? That's really important, that we understand all the connections amongst the different areas within your machine. If we go on to the next point. So this is a very important correlation, which is, and in fact, it is a strong one, which is there is a strong correlation between strategic performance, so whether your strategy gets aligned within and gets executed appropriately over a 10-year period, and the degree of alignment of a business to its strategy. And what we see, unfortunately, all too often is that sometimes there are not even checks in place in organizations to check if there is an alignment between the strategy that they say that I want to do and the actual business. Well, unfortunately, if there isn't that level of alignment, then chances are, and we say this out of the experience that we have and what we see with clients, is that chances are that that strategy will fail and that will cost a lot of money to the business. So going to the next point, I will now pass on to our CEO, Rob Shorrock, who will explain to you, based on the context that I've laid out so far, he will explain to you some examples on how we're working with clients and the things that we're learning from them.
Thank you very much, Alex. Really great to have you all on the call. I'm very grateful for you joining and spending this short amount of time with us. What Alex was just talking about in terms of alignment between the business and the organization strategy is actually fundamental, and it's actually at the very, very heart of what we at the Leadership Gallery do. Our experience and our research have confirmed two core truths. Misalignment, the first one is that misalignment within a leadership team, or in fact in cross sections of an organization, are the greatest barrier to successful strategy execution. The second thing is actually that every organization does need to be able to focus. Even the most accomplished organizations, and you will all have been aware of many, many organizations who are very sophisticated and have great systems and processes, but even the most accomplished of those will struggle to focus on more than 2 to 4 strategic issues at any one time. Maybe less, maybe more, but only marginally. So what I wanted to do at this point was just to show you a few examples from our own work and our own research, which demonstrate how we identify the priority issues. And the main reason for wanting to share this with you now is essentially to help you understand a point and to emphasize a point that Alex just made. It's to help you understand how important it is that right now, within this very odd and strange world and environment that we're working in, this VUCA environment, if you like, that you stress test your strategy, that you identify what those key priorities are, and that you keep your organization and your alignment in check. So let me just run through a couple of companies with you. This first is an engineering company we worked with in 2019. The analysis that's on display here represents the combined responses of the leadership team of this particular business. Just so that you know, each point on this visual represents an issue or a factor that can affect successful strategy execution. These factors will cover a range of, these cover a range of factors that will range from critical capabilities to competitive responses, regulatory changes, suitability of the processes to the strategy. Is the structure right? Are the systems in place right? How supportive is the culture to delivering your strategy? So on the x-axis, you will see the team's confidence level on each issue. So moving from left to right, low confidence to high confidence. On the y-axis, so on the vertical axis, you will see the degree of alignment or misalignment within that top team. So what you see in this leadership team here, the higher up the axis you go, the greater the misalignment. And if you can imagine splitting this into 4 quadrants, the top left quadrant, in other words, the least confidence, also shows the highest level of misalignment. And that's about the impact of perspective in this example, in this organization, massive engineering organization, the impact of prospective changes in regulations that could completely change the context and take away some of its real competitive advantages. Now, when we did this, of course, COVID-19 was not even imagined. In actual fact, what was really imagined was the EU exit and what was going to happen with that and how this would change the import and export program of this particular company and the real concern that this could take away some of its competitive advantages. So at a very, very top level, and of course, as probably many of us do, we will drill down into lots more detail from a picture like this. But this shows you starts to show you some of the key priorities that organizations must consider. Let me show you another example. This is a retirement planning business that we worked with a couple of years ago. In this particular example, the greatest concerns, the same chart, the same diagnostic, if you like, was used. The greatest concerns and equally the highest misalignments actually were about the assessment of critical capabilities required in a future where digital transformation was likely to change the world. This organization really concerned that they didn't have those critical capabilities, that they weren't really evaluating competitive strengths, and they weren't considering if other competitors could come in very quickly and take away their competitive advantage as they saw it. In addition, they were not sure. This was quite an old business that had been around a long time, and they weren't sure that they had the right culture now to take advantage of the digital transformation, which at that point was seen to be all around them. Of course, at this point, it's all around them as well. So some very critical issues were identified. Another example was a global publishing business that we worked with actually this year, at the start of this year. And this is an interesting example because where there is serious misalignment, as well as low confidence around critical capabilities, and the potential impact of completely new competitors from a digital space, that was where the real focus was. And if there's anything this business needs to focus on, it's in these 2 areas. Interestingly, if you look at the bottom right quadrant, which represents the highest level of confidence as well as the greatest degree of alignment amongst the top team, you'll actually find that the real strengths of the business are there. The key question, of course, is how critical these strengths are to the success of a future strategy. So in this case, the key areas of strength for this business were its financial muscle and the ability for this business to kind of ride through some turbulent times and sustain viability, even if 2 or more assumptions in their plan didn't materialize or were achieved slower than projected. So this just gives you a snapshot of how we help organizations to look at the key areas of focus and then understand where they really need to kind of place their bets if they're going to make sure that their strategy succeeds. Let me hand you back over to Alex and we'll take this on a little bit further. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So now let's go towards the final part of the session, which is the critical lessons for leaders today. If we go on to the next slide, the first one is align leadership team. So you should be asking yourselves, are your leadership team and your organization of one mind as you execute towards your strategic goals? Are they actually aligned? And if there is a part within yourselves as leaders or within your organization that think that isn't the case, then I highly recommend that you work towards that alignment to find out why you're misaligned and how can you work towards aligning the organization. Now let's look at some of the rationale within this point. So the insight again is we highly recommend that you keep an aligned leadership team because it will increase the likelihood of delivery of your strategy. Our own estimations, they see, and there are different ways of checking that. Therefore, we need to keep it broader than a specific number. But our estimations, they find out that there is a 20 to 30% increase in productivity, as well as, of course, consequential results as a result of leadership alignment. And that cascades onto improved productivity, improved results, employee engagement, as well as lower rates of employee turnover. Many sources confirm this hypothesis and this specific insight, including our own primary research. If we go on to the next one, we'll see that it's just as important to look at the right capabilities and ask yourselves, do you have the right capabilities as leaders so that you can actually achieve your strategic goals? Let's look at the rationale for that. So first of all, let's look at profitability-wise, which is obviously an important measure on how well your business is doing. Not the only one, but a very important one. And that is good leaders deliver profits, extraordinary leaders double them. And that is what we found and what's widely actually reported by a study from Jack Zenger. And that is poor leaders, they tend to drive losses. They're in the bottom 10%. Most leaders in the middle 80%, they tend to deliver profits. But then there is a smaller share of extraordinary ones. And these are the ones that double profits for the organization. Now, just to put it into more of a detail there. So 100 million of revenue, if on average a FTSE 100 organization makes a 14% profit margin of 14 million of operating profit, then an extraordinary leaders can add a further 12 million. And again, it's important to note here the word almost double profits, because according to the research is not exactly 100% more, but the gist of the slide here is if you have the right capabilities as leaders, then probably your profits will be higher, almost double. If we go on to the next one, then we'll see that the right organization structure and processes need too much, because if they do, then probably you will succeed. And if they don't, then your strategy most probably will fail. Let's look at the rationale for it, which is, it's incredibly important not only to focus on great strategy, but on executional excellence. Because a great strategy without execution, it's a useless strategy. In fact, it's detrimental and it's going to be a risk to your business. In fact, a survey of more than 400 global CEOs found that executional excellence was the #1 challenge out of a list of 80 issues, which included innovation, geopolitical instability, as well as top-line growth. Now, if you focus on executional excellence, then you'll have obviously a positive impact on revenues as well as profits. If we go on to the next point, and this is really the lessons that we'd like to leave you with today before Phil will share with you a little bit about the Leadership Gallery, and just before the question and answer sessions, which we'd love to see your involvement in. But if there is one thing that we'd like to share with you today, indeed, 3 things plus 1, and that is, first, stress test your strategy on a regular basis, not only once or 1 week after you've devised it. On a regular basis, we recommend at least twice a year. We have the tools to help you do that, but there are many other ways to do it. Just find a way, but ensure that you stress test your strategy. And then third, ensure that your leadership team is and stays aligned, because at some point they will not be, and that's perfectly normal as a process, but ensure they stay aligned. Then second, ensure you have the right leadership and executional and organizational capability, and then ensure that your organizational structure and processes are in place so that it can be future facing and they can guarantee executional excellence. So now I will hand over to my colleague Phil, who heads our business development, and will tell you a little bit more details about Align Plus strategy and how we support organizations, and then we will jump into the Q&A session.
Okay, thanks very much, Alex. Right, as Alex said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Leadership Gallery, and then I'll say a bit more about Align Plus. So the Leadership Gallery, it was set up 5 years ago, and it was from a team of business leaders who've been involved in both developing and implementing strategies in some significant organizations. So, for example, Rob Shorrock, our CEO, he was HR director at a number of companies, but those included LexisNexis, and also BAE Systems Avionics. And Anish Gupta, who you'll hear from in the Q&A session a bit later, Anish is the Strategy and IP Director at Leadership Gallery, and for 14 years, he was the Strategy Director at FTSE 100 company Reckitt Benckiser. And they're responsible for brands like Dettol, Harpic, Vanish, Clearasil, Strepsils, and many, many more. So let me just talk through the point two there. So we advise leaders on the external and internal strategic drivers of their business. So these are organizations that are either on the brink of change or they're experiencing factors which are going to have a significant impact on their business strategy. So things like COVID and Brexit, again, having a massive impact on organization strategy now and will do in the future. And as Rob said earlier about Align Plus strategy, most accomplished organizations struggle to focus on more than 2 to 4 issues at the same time. And what Align Plus does is help leaders identify and home in on some of the priority issues. Now, the Leadership Gallery works for both national and global clients and large and small. So from FTSE 100 through to much smaller SMEs. And it's in a range of sectors, both commercial and not-for-profit. So I'm just going to tell you or give you an overview of Align Plus. As I say, Alex and Rob have mentioned Align Plus a few times. I'm just going to explain what it is in broad terms, how it works, and what some of the benefits are. So Align Plus, it's a suite of 9 online diagnostics which are designed to stress test an organization's strategy. Can we just go back one? That's it. Stress test and organizations. No, we have the 9 diagnostic. That's it. Thank you. Just to show this live. Okay, the 9 online diagnostic tools designed to stress test an organization's strategy. So that's what they're designed to do. They're not about writing or developing a business's strategy. You know, that's already been done by the senior team. Instead, it's about testing, will it deliver in the way that's been promised to the board? And bearing in mind, as you heard earlier, 2/3 of strategies fail to deliver in the way planned. Most organizations start with the strategy, sorry, the tool, the diagnostic in the middle, Align Plus strategy. This is what we call our gateway diagnostic. I'm just going to take you through an example now just to show you how that works. So Align Plus strategy is usually conducted with an executive or senior leadership team or a functional leadership team. So these are the people who usually have written the strategy, or even if they haven't and they've inherited it, it's something that they've committed to the board that they will deliver. And what it checks out is how robust the strategy is, how resilient the strategy is, and how ready is it. So from a robust point of view, how good are the assumptions that's been made about context, purpose, environment, regulation, etc. So, and resilient, if 2 or more of assumptions fail, will the strategy still deliver in the way that's planned? And readiness, is it ready now? Is it future-proofed? So let me give you an example then. So let's assume we've got 8 members on an executive team. You've got the CEO, the CFO, the ops director, marketing director, and so on. Each of these 8 members gets sent an email to their personal email address box, which contains a video explaining how you complete the diagnostic, and it contains 18 questions. Now, these 18 questions are very straightforward, but they've been carefully thought through. So they take about 20 minutes to complete, and once you've completed them, you hit the submit button and up pops up an individual strategy report. I'll just give you an example of what that contains. So each person, as I say, gets their overall strategy report, the individual strategy report, which gives them an overall score, which is on the bottom left-hand corner there, which then breaks down to those 3 headings that I mentioned earlier: robust, resilient, and ready. Anything under 75% should cause an organisation to pause. It's a cause for concern. Everything is not well with the strategy. In this example, the overall score is 65%, robust is 68, resilient is 46, and ready is 72. So they're all below 75%. The one that's of most concern to this individual is the resilience score, which is 46%. In addition to the scores, each individual gets a very detailed report, which feeds back, depending on how they answer the questions, their own views on how robust the strategy is, how resilient, how ready it is. And again, you can see some examples there on the screen. Now, all this is sort of reasonably interesting, but at this stage, all it's playing back is what I as an individual think of my own strategy, which, as I say, is interesting, but doesn't add much value. Where the real value comes in is when you bring together in a workshop all 8 members, in this case, of that executive team to see where we agree and where we don't agree. So this is the sort of the final part of the process. So the final stage, it's a facilitated workshop, which gets all individuals around the table, and the table can be a virtual table or a real table. And what we're doing, we're sharing views and we're contrasting views. So, for example, the finance director may think that the leadership capabilities are fine. The issues lies with the processes. Where the ops director, she sees it completely differently. She thinks actually the processes are okay. It's leadership that's not great, and the organisation isn't engaged. In fact, the culture's not right for this organisation either. And the CEO sees it completely differently again. So you're getting all these different views from around the table. So what the workshop is doing is highlighting where the gaps are, where the weaknesses are, also the strengths, but also how aligned or misaligned is this senior team around this workshop, which they promised the board they're going to deliver. The workshop finishes with an action planning session, which actually addresses those issues. How do we plug those gaps? How do we overcome those weaknesses? How do we make sure we get our strategy back on track? And then what happens is this 3-stage process is then repeated in either 6 months' time or maybe a year's time, really just to check, are we doing the things that we said we were doing? Are we back on track? Now, the benefits of Align Plus is that it's straightforward, quick, and cost-effective. So what you don't have are teams of large consultants crawling all over a business for weeks or months, taking up valuable executives' time. Instead, it's a 20-minute diagnostic, which you complete in the comfort of your own home, should you wish, and it's followed by a 3 to 4 hour workshop, as I say, either virtual or face-to-face, in which you discuss it, share the issues, and work out an action plan.